commemorate the ending of the Great War on the 11th of November 1918, almost 100 years ago. A war that was the end result of a combination of events and acts of aggression, which led to Germany being given an ultimatum by the British Prime Minister, Herbert Asquith. He demanded that the German army be withdrawn from their invasion of Belgium by midnight on the 4th of August 1914. Having received no indication that Germany would comply, the declaration of war was declared at midnight German time, 11 p.m. in London. It was to be a short war, all over by Christmas, was the consensus of opinion. Young men and boys were anxious and more than willing to sign up to fight for their country, and they did. From England, Wales, Scotland and from Ireland, they queued at recruiting offices and signed their names for adventure and for glory. When it was time for them to leave, the goodbyes were heartbreaking.
Was born in Oswestry in 1893 and he died in battle in France exactly 1 week before the signing of the armistice. His mother received the telegram informing her of his death whilst the church bells of Shrewsbury were ringing out in celebration. He is buried in France. War broke, and now the winter of the world with perishing great darkness closes in. The foul tornado centred at Berlin is all over the width of Europe world, rending the sails of progress. Rent or furled are all art's enzymes. First wails now begin famines of thought and feeling. Love winds thin. The grain of human autumn rots, down hurled.
Scattered wide, they're Britons still, and they are not afraid to come across the ocean and join us hand in hand and fight the foes that would enslave the dear old motherland.
Leave you, though it breaks my heart to go.
Siegfried Sassoon joined the army just before the war was declared. In 1915, he was hit hard by the death of his brother at Gallipoli, and by November that year, he was fighting on the front line in France. Here, he was shocked by the reality of trench warfare. The ugliness of war, combined with his own experiences, encouraged him to write gritty, realistic poetry, emphasising the tragedy and futility of war. He was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery in action. Attack by Siegfried Sassoon. At dawn the ridge emerges, mashed and done, in the wild purple of the glowing sun, smouldering through sprouts of drifting smoke that shroud the menacing scarred slope, and one by one tanks creep and topple forward to the wire. The barrage roars and lifts. Then, clumsily bowed with bombs and guns and shovels and battle gear, men jostle and climb to meet the bristling fire. Lines of grey, muttering faces, masked with fear, they leave the trenches, going over the top, while time ticks, blank and busy on their wrists, and hope, with furtive eyes and grappling fists, flounder in mud. Oh, Jesus, make it stop.
During World War I, up to 12 million letters a week were delivered to soldiers, many on the front line. When a soldier on the Western Front wrote to a London newspaper in 1915 saying he was lonely and would appreciate receiving some mail, the response was immediate. The newspaper published his name and regiment, and within weeks he had received 3,000 letters, 98 parcels, and 3 mailbags full of smaller packages. Had that soldier had the time to respond to every letter, he could have done. Wherever he was fighting, his reply would have been delivered back to Britain within a day or two of posting. How the General Post Office maintained such an efficient service to soldiers and sailors during World War I is a story of remarkable ingenuity and amazing courage. Here is part of a letter from an unknown soldier in 1914. The trenches are in a terrible condition. Anything up to 4 feet deep in mud and water. We're plastered in mud up to our faces. Our food, cold bacon, bread and jam, is slung together in a sack that hangs from the dripping dugout roof. Consequently, we eat and drink mud.
And now for some humour from the trenches. On Army Forms by Sergeant Charles H. Moss of the 18th Battalion Durham Light Infantry. On Army Forms, Tommy's the name he bears, but in the ranks this moniker's no good. If he's a Murphy, whatever he cares, he'll get no other name than Spud. And if he's one of the family Clark and was baptised Fred or Jack or Bobby, or uses his number to keep it dark, he will always loudly be called Nobby. And if his true surname should be Miller, let him be fraud or good and trusty, a man or a mouse or a lady killer, you'll find he will always be called Dusty.
My Little Wet Home in a Trench by Tom Scahill. Tom Scahill was an Australian soldier who fought at Gallipoli. He was blinded there in 1915. I've a little wet home in a trench, and the rainstorms continually drench. There's grey sky overhead, clay or mud for a bed, and stone we use for a bench. Bully beef and hard biscuit we chew. It seems years since we tasted a stew. Shells crackle and scare, yet no place can compare with my little wet home in the trench.
Here is a letter from Acting Colour Sergeant Richard Gilson, aged 28, written from France on the 12th of May 1915. My dear mother, have just come through a particularly nasty period. We went into the trenches on Saturday night, and on Sunday morning at 5 a.m, our artillery commenced bombarding the German trenches, and after 20 minutes had elapsed, we went over the parapet. My goodness, what a reception the Huns had in store for us. They simply swept the ground with machine gun fire and shrapnel. Poor old C Company caught it hot. The Neuve Chapelle seemed to be a flea bite compared with this. It was found impossible to make any advance in our quarter, so I dug myself in and awaited events. It was horrible suspense, as I seemed to be the only man untouched all around me, and being personally acquainted with each man made it even worse. In fact, it's wrong to call them men, as they were mostly mere boys. At about early afternoon, I was hailed from the trench as to whether it was possible for me to get back. I replied in the affirmative and decided to run the risk of getting potted on the way. So I commenced crawling on my stomach until about a few yards from the parapet, then made a spring and rushed headlong over the top, nearly spoiling the features of a few that happened to be in the trench and were not expecting me. We have been resting since, but by all reports we shall be up again soon. No rest for the wicked, it said, and if true, we must surely be a bad lot. I lost all my belongings, except the Gillette razor, so should be glad of a few toilet requisites when next you are sending a parcel. And perhaps Frank would get me a shaving brush. Must close now. Much love to all, from your affectionate son, Dick. The Christmas Truce, from a letter home by Private Albert Moran of the 2nd Queen's Regiment. It was a beautiful moonlit night, frost on the ground, white almost everywhere. At about 7 or 8 in the evening, there was a lot of commotion in the German trenches, and there were these lights. I don't know what they were. And then they sang Silent Night, Still Nacht. I shall never forget it. It was one of the highlights of my life. I thought, what a beautiful tune.
was written as a postcard and composed by M. Wilding on the 25th of October 1915. The local lads mentioned on the card were all from Preston in Lancashire. Most of them lads who, before the war, had never held a gun. Most of them, too, had never dreamed that they would face the Hun. They went where the country needed them to take an active part, and the charge they made on June 15 is impressed on every heart. No need to give an order twice. The 14th was strong and true. They thought of fallen comrades in England, home and you. And indignation filled their hearts as they entered in the fight, prepared to conquer or to die, that long remembered night. You read about that gallant charge, about the noble deed. Then let us all together strive to help their present need. A long drear winter is at hand, the local lads away. Need comfort we at home can give, then let us start today.
were amongst those who answered the French call to arms. A quarter never returned. Bretons felt that they were thought of as ignorant peasants and only fit for cannon fodder. Bretons were killed and wounded at a rate of twice the national average. For many Bretons, service in the trenches of Verdun or on the Marne